There is nothing left now at the farm to tell us what really happened here. They say DNA carries the genetic footprint of a person, the essence of who we are. But what does it really tell us about anyone? For me, finding Dawn's DNA raised more questions than it gave answers. Who was she, and how did we lose her? Like Dawn, I too am a Native woman, and for me, her story is part of a much bigger picture. They say more than 500 Native women have gone missing or been murdered across Canada in the past 20 years. I need to put a human face to what's happened to so many of my sisters. And it starts with finding Dawn. These are the streets where Dawn spent her final years and where she disappeared. Vancouver's downtown east side is one of Canada's poorest neighborhoods, and it has more than its share of homelessness, drug addiction, prostitution, and crime. For the women who vanished from this community, life here was a daily struggle, and they did what they had to do to survive. Each of them had a story, and like Dawn, most of them started out somewhere else. I'm going to Chilliwack to meet Dawn's brother, Ernie Cray, a longtime activist for Aboriginal rights in BC. Dawn came from the Stalo Nation, whose traditional territory starts at the mouth of the Fraser River and extends deep into the canyons of the coastal mountains.
I think all of us are quite proud of our tribal ancestry. We're the Stalo people. The people of the river. We're a fishing community. Community that has lived here, we're told, based on all the archaeological evidence that's been surfaced over the past few decades, probably for as long as 9,000 years, certainly since the last ice age. This is the place we call home, and we grew up here.
Ernie describes his family as being at the eye of the hurricane that came with European settlement. Within 4 generations, the Stalo lost much of what they held dear: their land, their livelihood, and even their children, who were taken away first to residential schools and then to foster homes. Dawn's sister Lorraine remembers the day they lost their father, a day that had disastrous consequences for all the Cray children, but especially for Dawn.
I was playing in the front yard with Dawn, and our dad was there. And I remember we're all running around, just playing. Our father was playing, and then he just collapsed. And he just laid there, and Dawn ran to him. And she put his head in her lap. And I was much younger, and she was screaming for her mother. But her mother didn't acknowledge the screams because she thought we were just playing.
Within a year, Dawn and her siblings were taken from their mother and put in separate foster homes throughout the Fraser Valley. Dawn and her older sister Faith were placed in the same foster home, and what they experienced there stayed with them for life.
Even Dawn, the last couple of months that I spent with her 10 years ago, she would still talk about these experiences. Why? Somebody in their late 20s, early 30s, why would this still be important? Why would a tear come to her eye when she talked about these kinds of experiences at the hands of her foster parents? And her older sister Faith, who was in the same foster home, why is it that At 1:30 in the morning, she'd phoned me from Edmonton before she died on the streets, Dawn's older sister. Why would she phone me in the 1:30 in the morning from Edmonton and talk about these experiences to me, and insisted that I tell her I love her, at 1:30 and 2 in the morning. Yeah, it hurts. And yes, it makes me angry. And what could I do about it? Who could I hold accountable for the kind of experiences they went through?
Dawn was eventually moved to a second foster family, the Weebs, who loved and cared for her as one of their own. Though she spent several happy years there, it wasn't enough to ease the yearning she had for her own lost family.
I met Dawn when I was walking through Woolworths. She was inside a little photo stand, and she came, ripped open the curtains, and then she jumped out, and then she jumped right in front of me. She had like a, Lorraine, you're my sister. Wow. I still remember her bright eyes and her long hair and the way she leaped out. It was like, and then she looked so happy to see me.
The two sisters soon left their foster homes and set off for the bright lights of Vancouver. They had no home and few prospects, but as long as they were together, they could look out for each other. But when Lorraine decided to return to Chilliwack, Dawn stayed in the city, and it was then that their lives took very different turns.
She became lonely, penniless, till she met up with a girl they befriended, and she helped Dawn put her out on the street. Dawn didn't like that. She was actually very scared. She didn't want to do it at all. So she had problems. Her first time she had problems. She wouldn't do anything. She just left. She just couldn't do it. She couldn't turn a trick, as they call it. She went back to the friend that introduced her to that type of life. Introduced her to drugs and told her this would make you comfortable. It did make her comfortable. And then she started tricking. And then, well, just that experimenting with that drug, it led to an addiction.
Dawn was a familiar face in the downtown east side for more than 20 years. In the months before she disappeared, she was living in a hotel near Main and Hastings, but she was on a methadone program and trying to get her life back on track. By this time, Lorraine was back in Vancouver, and she'd call Dawn every couple of weeks, and they'd arranged to meet. They shared their last meal together on this park bench, but a few weeks later, when Dawn didn't return her calls, Lorraine knew that something was wrong.
There was no sign of her anywhere. She wasn't going to any of the doctors down there anymore. So it became apparent to me that, yes, indeed, something has happened to her.
It was more than 3 years from the time she disappeared until Dawn's DNA was finally identified in material taken from the farm. Her brother Ernie became an advocate for the families of all the missing and murdered women. But he's been particularly outspoken about the fact that almost half of them were Aboriginal.
I think that, and I've said this before, if these women had been from a wealthier part of Vancouver, you know, say Kerrisdale or the west end of Vancouver, some upscale, tonier neighborhood in Vancouver, and involved largely white women, if I can put it that way, that the investigation would have been thoroughgoing, it would have been well-financed, and there would have been a lot of police officers, Johnny on the spot, and we would have very likely had a suspect in jail far earlier than was the case where all of these missing women are concerned. Not all of the missing women are Aboriginal, but what they have in common, the non-Aboriginal women that have vanished from the streets, in common with the Aboriginal women, is that they were all poor, living in a poor community in Vancouver, the downtown east side, probably drug dependent, and having to resort to prostitution to deal with their habituation to street narcotics.